got the rest of this season, and the Jets have control for one more year for Pierre-Luc Dubois. If last summer was somewhat overblown, the importance of Pierre-Luc Dubois to this team has only increased, in my opinion, over the course of this season. So where are we right now with Pierre-Luc Dubois and his future? I mean, I certainly want to believe that this season, the success that the team is having, the atmosphere around it, the personal success he's having with Kyle Connor, all would maybe, and I think logically you would say they would improve the chances of him sticking around. But I mean, you could go from a 1% chance to a 5% chance it's improving. Right. It's still not very high. I mean, when you look at this situation, big picture, for both the Jets, where they are as a team, and Pierre-Luc Dubois, how do you see this playing out, particularly from the Jets' perspective, where, in my opinion, you need to know what's happening going into next season because he's just too big of an asset considering what you've given out to get him here to let him walk for nothing. But he's also such a huge part of why you're winning hockey games right now.
It's a great question. And I imagine if you're from Pierre-Luc Dubois' camp, I don't think you're even talking right now, right? I mean, you're just focused on this season. I think the Jets are going to get a lot of answers in the offseason, right? I mean, I think we as, reporters and, of course, fans are going to get a lot of answers too after this offseason, depending on how long he signs for. If he signs for 1 year, then it becomes an automatic storyline all season long, as ultimately he'd be marching his way to unrestricted free agency. And so this is the way I always viewed it with just how last season went. Excuse me. Just how last season went with Pierre-Luc Dubois was, I felt this year the Jets were almost in a lose-lose situation. Which isn't a great situation. And why I thought that was, okay, so say they bring in a new coach. The coach is able to rally the troops and get them to a great spot, which is exactly what we're seeing with Rick Bowness and the Jets here. And Pierre-Luc Dubois shines under the new coaching, which I think is what we're seeing. I mean, Rick Bowness has had conversations with, I imagine, every single player, but particularly his top guys. We know the conversation he had with Josh Morrissey about how he can be more offensive and how he can be one of the best defensemen in this league. And we're seeing a lot of that this year. We're definitely seeing him move towards that direction, much like we're seeing Pierre-Luc Dubois become, as I mentioned before, that 200-foot power forward that he wants to be. And that's what he's being encouraged by Rick Bowness to become. And we're seeing that this season. We're seeing him. He's going to probably absolutely rock his previous highs and goals and assists and points this year. He's playing a great defensive game, as we heard Rick Bowness talk about after the Arizona game about, yes, he's at 20 goals this year, but it's his defensive game that's underrated and whatever. That is, if you can become that player, you are going to be very, very, very expensive and sought after. I mean, Pierre-Luc Dubois is the new era power forward. And so the lose-lose situation was, if the Jets were to, shit the bed, for lack of a better term, sorry for my language, but I think he would be gone for sure. So that was the 0% chance of him coming. But then to your point, Haas, about the 1% to 5%, who knows what that increase is, but the only chance you have of retaining him or signing him long-term is if he can get better here. But then you deal with the issue here that if he gets better here, he might want to test unrestricted free agency. I mean, I brought this up with Kenny and Rennie last night. Remember Michael Frolik, like a few years ago, and he was becoming a pending free agent, and he was just scrumming, and he told us all that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to hit unrestricted free agency. He was still a member of Jets. There's still lots to talk, still lots of games to play. That's what every single player thinks of. And I mean,
yeah, but they don't always go to it. I mean, the bottom line is the onus is on the club to make an offer that says, hey, listen, exactly, this is the right spot for you.
But we know the Winnipeg Jets don't have Mark Scheifele as a barometer anymore. The salary cap is going up. You can't look at Pierre-Luc Dubois and go, look, this is what we're paying, Mark Scheifele. Like, we'll pay you a couple million more. They're going to have to do something they've never done in the 12 years that the Jets have been back, and that's pay a double-digit a year player. They're becoming
it's called inflation. I mean, you're in the National Hockey League.
Absolutely, but the Jets haven't been known to do that. The other part, too, is, yes, there's players that don't go test free agency, but Pierre-Luc Dubois has been open about being a 24-year-old kid and about this next deal determining his future, where he's going to live, where he's going to raise a family, all these things that are incredibly important two players. And it's falling at a time where if you look at a lot of the other guys who sign, whether it be Nick Ehlers, whether it be Mark Scheifele, whether it be all, guys who signed long-term deals, they were young. I don't even know if they were probably thinking, I don't know if I could be in this league long-term and I want to sign and get some money here so I can start making big dollars, not about your family, right? So as young as Pierre-Luc Dubois is, he's still a little bit older, and having some of those serious, and we all know his interest in, his fashion, all these things. There's all these things that come into play. And I know people hate, I think Winnipeg's a great spot. I think Winnipeg has a ton of opportunity here as far as being a good team, especially under Rick Bowness now. And that will be a fascinating part of it, to see if there's a Rick Bowness effect of Pierre-Luc Dubois. All those things are in place, and there's a lot of benefit. There's people who love hockey here. People want to play in a hockey mad city. That's kind of a double-edged sword, but there is positives to it for sure. I just think in this situation, he's going to entertain the idea of, max money, only can get max term from the Jets, obviously, that 8th year. So that's pretty important. That could be an incentive too. For this guy, I just have a gut feeling. I know fans don't want to hear it, but I think he's going to be the hardest out of all three players to bring back, once his contract's done here.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I guess of all three players, I mean, you could certainly make that argument, but I don't necessarily think that it's an insurmountable challenge. And in fact, I'll point out, as much as, people want to point out, hey, they're going to have to go more than they've gone for before. Well, yeah, guess what? That's the natural progression of salaries, the increase of the cap, and the value of a player. But I will say this, you also want to succeed. You also want to win. Like, I'm not sure that the better fashion in Montreal or whatever, some of those intangibles around it is going to be what makes his decision for him. I think this is going to be a professional decision. And I'll say this, I've said this a million times this season, the success that he's having personally right now, the connection with Kyle Connor, the fact that they're winning, the fact that this team, dare I say, might be capable of some pretty special things come the spring, would all trump all of that as long as the money's there. And from a Jets perspective, and this doesn't matter whether we're talking about Dubois or we're talking about Connor Hellebuck, the two most important things on Kevin Cheveldayoff's to-do list, much like they've done before in successfully signing and re-signing so many of their important players, they're going to have to come to the table with not only a plan, but compensation that makes those players say, you know what, it is worthwhile doing that. I'm not sure they get to that point with Dubois. The one thing I do know, or I certainly believe, is that they better find out sooner as opposed to later, and because you don't want this being a story a year from now going into potentially a trade deadline on what could very well be another very good contending team next year, and then run yourself the risk of being left holding the bag for nothing at the end of the season.
One, I think there's two options here. I think you find out, I think you're like, whether they say it or not, they're going to get a damn good idea this summer.
100%.
Everything he said there certainly makes a ton of sense and bodes well for, the idea of re-signing him, right? The Kyle Connor connection. There's absolutely no doubt. There's production here, right? I also think guys who, are top-end players believe they can make any team better, right? They feel they can go to any club and be that asset or whatever, or help turn around a club or whatever. I don't think this guy's going to, a bottom feeder necessarily. And you look at Montreal, and yeah, that's going to have a lot of, obviously that's going to have a lot of appeal to a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois or whatever, but they're building something too. They're not good, but they're going to be good in a couple of years based on their picks. But the two situations based on this summer is I could see one of two things happening. Pierre-Luc Dubois being traded in the summer, because if you're going to, if you're going to sign him and keep him, so it's either being traded in the summer or signing him to one more year and likely holding on to him for the year. And I know that's not a popular, I know people might be yelling at their computers right now. Those are the two options I see with the Jets. I just don't see how you get an answer from Pierre-Luc Dubois this summer, and if it results in another year deal, you have your answer. How you don't trade him at that point in time to build for what will be what I imagine is going to be another good year for the Winnipeg Jets. And get pieces back and get assets back or whatever it might look like. or you sign him, and if you're playing well, you're not. Are you really going to get rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois at the trade deadline if you're leading the Western Conference again, or you're a Stanley Cup contender? So I think those are probably your two options. And if you're coming from a perspective of you don't want to, if you don't think you're going to sign him, I don't know how you go into next year with him without thinking, okay, if things go really well, I don't think you're going to ditch him at the deadline. You're going to keep him for an extra.
No, you have to be prepared to do that. And
Absolutely.
I mean, that's sort of why I think that, in the best interest of the organization, they get some clarity this summer, one way or the other, and make that decision.